So this is how Nepal technically got their freedom from Britain and overall what became the formation of Nepal. I will answer the questions as if they were successful, who was involved in their success, and specifically what leaders brought them to where they are today. I'm going to start in 1768 and finish in 2002. Nepal is located between India and China. Most people don't actually know where Nepal is because it's such a secluded country. It's so very introverted, and their closed borders somewhat affected of what people knew about them. We start in 1768, where Nepal was formed by their king Gurkha. This was according to the BBC. Skipping to 1792, China and Nepal were beginning to have issues with border disputes, specifically the Qing dynasty of Tibet. The war had also been called the Sino-Nepalese War and had an unreliable peace treaty to follow. This would only be the beginning to what the British rule of India, also known as the East Indian Company, would have issues in 1814 to 1816, which would have pretty much Nepal give up a third of their land. 1795 comes around, and the East India Company, ran by the British, start talking to Nepal about the border disputes, but more specifically the route to Tibet that they really wanted to have. This both got the sides angry, and this somewhat caused the war of the Sino-Nepalese War. The British ended up winning, and the treaty was made in 1814 but signed in 1816. This image shows the Gurkhas troops in 1814, but the leader of Nepal at the time was Narayan Shah. He was very important because he led many of the battles during the war, his biggest achievement being when he invaded the Malla capital of India during the war. But going back to the treaty called the Sigali Treaty gave Britain a third of Nepal's land, but brought the two closer for future transactions. According to Leo Rose, who wrote the book Nepal, Strategy for Survival, Nepal was one of the only cases when Britain did not actually take control of the land, but had a more close bond with them, and it was more as a business agreement. Overall, during the war, Nepal was largely impacted by Britain because this sealed their fate of peace, also giving them the support of Britain, but would have to fight on their sides in future wars. This would only be the beginning of how the British used Nepal in multiple scenarios, according to the article Causes and Consequences of Anglo-Nepal War. Scooting along to 1846, the current king of the time, Prime Minister Bir Shamir, finally made the decision that the country would officially close or be shut away from the rest of the world. The monarchy made the decision after scares with China during the time, Britain making the decision not to help Nepal during these discretions. This resulted in the Nepal-Tibetan War of 1856. Not many people know much information on it because the country had originally closed in 1846. Sourcing a BBC news article on Nepal, originally written in 1980, they go on to say the constitutional referendum follows agitation for reform. Small majority favors keeping existing panchayat system. King agrees to allow direct elections to National Assembly, but on a non-party basis. This is ultimately saying the King of Nepal will begin to lean towards democracy, but will never fully want the people to have control, even though Britain continues to promote a more democratic system for Nepal, which is why Britain decided not to help Nepal during the war with China. Later on, Nepal then reopens in 1923 with large British influence. The monarchy that ruled Nepal was still very relevant during the time. Later that year, Britain and Nepal signed a treaty which once more reaffirms their relationship with each other. The treaty was actually a superseded version of the Sigali Treaty that was signed in the 1800s. The treaty not only left the two working together and on good terms, but also allowed Nepal to keep their independence, and the treaty was virtually the same as before. Though this treaty would change in the future when India won their independence, and this would make Britain go to Nepal because they had more historical interest of the past, according to the article titled Country Studies, Nepal. This image is one of the only photos taken during the time the country was reopening and shows the cultural impact that Britain had influenced, this including the suggestive British-influenced uniforms. Referencing the article The Independence of Nepal and the Freedoms by the website InfoPlease, it can be said Nepal is slowly obtaining more British and Western traditions and cultural norms as their partnership grows closer. But soon the relationship with India will change also. The relationship changing in 1950 when India signs a peace treaty with Nepal, this creating a small hole in how Nepal once saw Britain. Nepal's relationship with Britain was beginning to have a larger role. Nepal was seen as more and more as a stronger country and less as a small tool. This being said, Britain sends less representatives and instead Queen Elizabeth II. According to the journal article Asian Survey Nepal in 1980, written by Douglas Heck, Nepal is seen as a country of peace between Britain and the hesitant India. This is being endorsed originally by Britain, though this is not all true because Nepal is having economic hesitation and the wish for reform in the country's government. The country yearned for a more democratic system, and by the mid-80s it had civil disobedience campaigns for the more political parties of the government. Going off an article of the website called Study Academy, it goes into depth of the leader during the 80s and how the president Birendra Bir Bikram Shah Dev had more of a monarchy-style ruling while the people wanted a Western take on democracy, this leading to riots throughout Nepal. This would lead to a new terrorist rebel organization called Mao. Shahdev is the last of the monarchy rule that had been consuming Nepal. Though he had a clear soft spot for Queen Elizabeth and enjoyed spending time with her frequently, he wanted to keep his stable monarchy rule until he fell in 2001 when he was assassinated in his palace. He was assassinated by his son and died alongside the Queen of Nepal before his son shot himself. Sadly, this gave room to Maoist rebels in Nepal to take advantage of the weak government, though people sided with the more Western views like Britain had. Overall, it can be said Britain had a large influence over Nepal and specifically their freedom. Though Nepal was never specifically owned by Britain, there was a large network of friendship and business deals that went on between the two. They both had large influences on each other, and Nepal was able to benefit politically and economically from Britain. The impacts between the two have lasted for a very long time and will be significant for the future to come. Nepal was able to see in a more democratic light, while it was able to still have a connection to an Asian country after the freedom of India. In all, the two benefited a lot from each other, and though there were struggles, both were able to have independence and freedom with each other.